The knock came after dark, and Willa Pruitt almost did not answer it. She had reason not to. A woman alone on 60 acres of dying grassland, 12 miles from the nearest neighbor, did not open her door to strangers after sunset. The drought had taken everything: the garden, the well, the last of the cattle she had sold for pennies on the dollar 2 weeks ago to keep the bank from taking the land. All she had left was the land itself, a roof that leaked in 3 places, and a stubbornness that her late husband, Henry, had once called her finest quality and her worst failing. The knock came again. She picked up the rifle Henry had taught her to shoot and cracked the door 2 inches. The man on her porch was tall, trail-worn, and swaying on his feet. His clothes were caked with red dust, and his face was sunburned raw. A battered hat hung from one hand. His horse stood at the rail, head down, ribs showing through a dull coat. Both the man and the animal looked like they had been riding for days without stopping. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was a croak. "I am sorry to trouble you. I have been on the trail from Bozeman, and I believe I took a wrong turn somewhere around the Blackwater Fork. I need water. I can pay." Willa looked at him. She was 31, a widow of 18 months, and she had learned in that time to read men the way she read weather, quickly and without sentiment. This one was not dangerous. He was simply spent. "You do not need to pay for water," she said. "Pump is around back. It is running low, but it will give you enough." She started to close the door. Then she looked at the horse again. Its head was hanging so low its muzzle nearly touched the ground. She looked at the man and saw what she had missed: the slight tremor in his hands, the hollow shadows under his eyes. He had not eaten in a while. She closed her eyes and sighed the way a woman sighs when her conscience makes a decision her common sense would not have approved. "I have bread," she said. "It is the last loaf I have, so I will not pretend it is not. But you are welcome to half." The man stared at her, as if she had spoken in a foreign language. "Ma'am, I cannot take your last food." "You are not taking it. I am giving it. There is a difference, and it matters. Come inside." His name was Silas Drummond. He sat at her kitchen table and ate half a loaf of bread with the careful restraint of a man who wanted to eat the whole thing and would not allow himself to. She noticed that he broke the bread with his hands, rather than cutting it, and that he chewed slowly, tasting every bite as if committing it to memory. She poured him coffee from the pot she kept on the back of the stove. It was weak, stretched thin with chicory, because real coffee cost more than she could spare, and he drank it without complaint, as though it were the finest thing he had tasted in days. He told her he was a cattleman heading south to meet a buyer in Billings. He had lost the trail in the dark and his horse was near done. He asked if he could sleep in her barn and be gone at first light. "The barn is mostly empty," Willa said. "There is hay in the loft. Help yourself." He thanked her a 3rd time and went out. She heard him at the pump, watering his horse before himself, talking to the animal in a low, steady voice that carried through the kitchen window like something she had not heard in this house for a long time, the sound of a man being gentle. She slept fitfully. She lay in the dark listening to the wind rattle the shutters and thinking about the man in her barn. There was something about him that did not add up. A cattleman heading to Billings would have taken the main road through 3 forks, not the wagon track that ran past Blackwater Creek. And his horse, tired as it was, there was good blood in that animal. The kind of blood that cost more than a working cattleman usually spent. She told herself it did not matter. He would be gone by morning, and she would be alone again, with the dust and the bank notice, and the 60 acres that were worth less. Every day the rain did not come. She woke to the sound of hooves. Not one horse, many horses. She grabbed the rifle and threw open the door. The dawn was just breaking, a thin line of gold along the eastern ridge, and in that half-light she saw something that made no sense. Her pasture, the empty, drought-cracked pasture that had held nothing but dust and dead grass for 3 months, was full of cattle. Not the scrawny range stock she had once owned. Good cattle. Fat, well-watered, heavy with muscle. She counted quickly. 30, 40, maybe 50 head, milling in the gray light as if they had always belonged there. Beside him, a lean-faced cowhand named Tolliver sat his horse, with the easy patience of a man who had done this 100 times before. Behind Tolliver, 3 more riders waited in the early light, their hats pulled low, their horses blowing steam in the cool morning air. The cattle had been driven through the night. She could see the trail dust still hanging in the air above the north fence line, and yet the animals were calm, watered, settled. Whoever had managed this drive knew what he was doing. Willa stood on her porch and watched the cattle settle into her pasture, like they had been there all along. The grass was thin and brown from the drought, but there was enough to hold them, and the creek, low as it was, still ran clear enough for drinking. These were not charity cattle, scrub range stock that someone wanted to be rid of. These were well-bred, heavy-boned animals that would throw strong calves and fetch top dollar in billings. She dressed quickly, pulled on her boots, and walked across the yard with the rifle in her hands and her hair still braided for sleep. She stopped 10 feet from the corral and looked at the cattle, then at Silas. "What is this?" she said. Silas took a sip of coffee. "This is a kindness. Repaid. I gave you half a loaf of bread. You gave me your last food. A stranger at your door in the dark, and you gave him the only thing you had left. Do you know how rare that is? It is bread, Mr. Drummond. It is not rare." He set the cup on the fence rail and climbed down. In the morning light, without the trail dust and the exhaustion, he looked different. Broader, steadier. His clothes were still plain, but they fit well, and the horse he had ridden in on, the same horse she had pitied for its condition, stood in the corral, looking rested and alert, its coat already showing the gloss of good breeding beneath the dust. "I was not lost last night," Silas said. "I was testing the trail from Bozeman to see if the route was passable for a herd. I took the wrong fork on purpose, because Tolliver told me there was a widow out here who had sold her cattle to keep her land and was about to lose both. I wanted to see what kind of woman she was." Willa's hands tightened on the rifle. "You lied to me." "I did, and I would do it again, because if I had ridden up here with 50 head of cattle and told you they were a gift, you would have told me to take them and leave. You are that kind of stubborn." "I know, because I am the same kind." She opened her mouth to argue and found she could not, because he was right. "The cattle are yours," he said, "free and clear. Consider them payment for the bread. 50 head of cattle for half a loaf of bread is not a fair trade." "It is, if the bread was given by a woman who had nothing left and gave it anyway." He paused. "I have more money than I need, and fewer people worth spending it on than I would like. You showed me something last night. Kindness is not a small thing, Mrs. Pruitt. It is the rarest commodity on the frontier." Willa stood there in her nightdress and her boots with a rifle she no longer needed, and she felt the hard shell she had built around herself, the one made of drought and grief and 18 months of doing everything alone, begin to crack along its seams. "I cannot accept charity," she said. "Then do not call it charity. Call it an investment. I am a cattleman. You have land and you know how to work it. I will supply the stock and the hands to help you get started. You run the operation. We split the profits. That is a business arrangement. It is a good one." She studied his face for a long time. She looked for the catch, the angle, the thing a man wanted when he gave a woman something for nothing. She had learned to look for it in the 18 months since Henry died, the neighbor who offered to help with the fence, and then suggested she might be lonely, the storekeeper in town who extended credit and let his hand linger on hers when she signed the ledger, men who saw a widow and calculated what she might trade for safety. She did not find it in Silas Drummond. She found something she had almost forgotten existed. "Why?" she asked. "You do not know me. I know you fed a stranger your last bread. I know you pumped water for his horse before you went back to sleep. I know you did not ask for anything in return. That tells me everything I need to know about your character, Mrs. Pruitt. The rest I would like to learn, if you will let me." She felt the heat rise in her face, and she did not fight it. She looked at the cattle in her pasture. Her pasture, which had been empty so long she had forgotten what it looked like full, and she felt the weight she had been carrying for 18 months shift on her shoulders. Not gone, not yet, but shared. For the first time since Henry died, someone was offering to carry part of it, and he was not asking her to be less than she was in exchange. She lowered the rifle. "You can start by calling me Willa," she said. He mended the fence line with his own hands. He dug a new drainage trench along the south pasture to catch whatever rain might come. He showed her a trick with the well pump, a leather gasket cut from an old saddle skirt that doubled the water flow, and when she asked where he had learned it, he said, "A Crow woman on the Yellowstone, 20 years ago. She said white men made everything harder than it needed to be." She was right about most things. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and watched the light die over the ridge. He told her about the trail drives he had made as a young man, the long nights, the river crossings, the way a herd sounded at 3 in the morning when the stars were thick and the coyotes called from the bluffs. She told him about Henry, about the farm in Ohio they had left behind, about the day she buried him in the hard ground behind the barn with a shovel that kept slipping in her hands because she could not stop shaking. "You dug the grave yourself?" he asked. There was no one else to do it. He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, "You are the strongest person I have ever met, Willa Pruitt." He said it the way a man states a fact about the weather, plainly, without decoration, as if it were simply true and needed no embellishment. She looked at her hands in her lap and did not trust herself to speak. On the 9th day, she baked bread, a fresh loaf, golden crusted, from a sack of flour Tolliver had brought from town, along with salt, sugar, coffee, and a bolt of blue calico she had not asked for and could not bring herself to return. She set the loaf on the table between them at supper. "This is not the last one," she said. Silas looked at the bread. He looked at her. The expression on his face was one she would remember for the rest of her life, gratitude and wonder, and the quiet, steadfast certainty of a man who has found the thing he did not know he was looking for. "No," he said, "it is not." He stayed through the season. He stayed through the fall gather, the first rain in 4 months, the afternoon when the well came back and Willa stood at the pump with water running over her hands and wept with relief, while Silas stood beside her and did not speak, did not touch her, simply waited until she was ready and then handed her his handkerchief. He stayed through the evening when she looked up from the ledger she was keeping, his cattle, her land, their shared future written in neat columns, and said, "I think the terms of our arrangement should change." "How so?" he asked. "I think you should stop sleeping in the barn." He went still. The firelight caught the sharp planes of his face and the depth in his brown eyes, and for a long moment the only sound was the pop of the logs and the wind outside. "Willa," he said carefully, "are you asking me what I think you are asking me? I am asking you to stay, not as a business partner, as a husband, if you will have a stubborn widow with 60 acres and a leaking roof." "The roof does not leak anymore," he said. "I fixed it. Then marry me for the bread." He laughed. It was a good sound, deep and surprised, and full of something that had been locked up for too long. He stood up from the table and crossed to her side and took both her hands in his calloused fingers wrapping around hers, like a promise made in the oldest language there was. "I will marry you for the bread," he said, "and for the woman who baked it, and for every morning I get to ride out with you and come home to your table." She wrote to the bank the next morning and enclosed the first payment on the note, drawn from the cattle profits. The banker in Billings wrote back a letter so surprised it was nearly polite. She pinned it to the kitchen wall beside the window, where she could see it every time she washed the dishes. Proof that the land was hers, that the drought had not won, that the woman who had given away her last bread had not been a fool after all. Tolliver rode to town for supplies and came back with a preacher. The preacher came 3 weeks later, a lean Baptist named Reverend Toll, who rode a mule and carried a Bible held together with twine. They married in the parlor of the ranch house. That night, the first rain of autumn drummed on the roof Silas had mended, and the land that had been dying began, slowly and surely, to come back to life. Just like she had.